Welcome to Christian Dawah. Today we're going to be answering the question, is the Prophet Muhammad found in the Old Testament? So, let's dive right in.
In the Old Testament, in the Song of Solomon, chapter 5, verse 16, in the Hebrew language, it reads, Hikko mamittakim vi kullo Mohammadim zahdudi vi zahra'i bainat Jerusalem. Song of Solomon, chapter 5, verse 16. The word Mohammadim is Muhammad, I am im. Im is a plural of respect in Hebrew. You see the first verse of the Bible, book of Genesis, chapter 1, verse 1. It says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The word God in Hebrew there is Elohim. In Hebrew, Elah stands for God. Elohim is a plural form to say with awe, respect, and reverence. Plural of respect. The word is there in the Hebrew language. In the original, what they call original, it's there. But they have translated that in English as altogether lovely. So this beloved of mine is altogether lovely. When you read altogether lovely, you can't associate with the word Muhammad.
So, as we can see, famed Muslim apologist Ahmed Deedat argues that in the book of Song of Solomon, chapter 5, verse 16, Muhammad is mentioned and Muhammad is prophesied. So, let's read this verse in English first and then in Hebrew. In English, this verse says, His mouth is most sweet, and he is altogether desirable. This is my beloved, and this is my friend, O daughters of Jerusalem. So he here is focusing on the first doublet, the first part of the verse, which is his mouth is most sweet, and he is altogether desirable. And what Ahmed Deedat argues is that the word in English that's translated as desirable is actually not an adjective here. It is a proper noun, and that proper noun is the name Muhammad. And so this verse is actually talking about the Prophet Muhammad. Well, let's read this beginning of the verse in Hebrew and see what he's talking about. So in Hebrew, this verse says, Hiko mamtakim vecholo machmadim. So Hiko mamtakim is his mouth. Hiko is his mouth. Mamtakim is sweet or sweetness. Vecholo, ve is and, kol is all, vecholo is and all of him, machmadim is sweet. So, what is going on here? Well, the word in Hebrew, as we've seen here, is machmadim. And Ahmed Deedat says, listen, we can see that this is actually the word Muhammad. You can hear Muhammad and Muhammad. They sound very similar. And he says, well, you might be wondering what's going on with the im ending, which is normally a plural ending. So why is it Machmadim? Why is it not just Machmad? And Ahmed Deedat argues that im is a plural of majesty, and that is used to give respect to people. And as an example, he uses the word Elohim, that El is God, and so Elohim is God with respect. Now, this, on the face of it, may seem like a good linguistic argument, but actually, this is not a very good linguistic argument. So, let's dive into exactly why. So, is the im ending on Machmadim a plural of majesty? Well, the answer is definitely not. The first point we can see for this is that the plurals of majesty in the Old Testament never ever apply to a human being. They only apply to God. So, like Ahmed Deedat said, we have the word Elohim. Elohim is God with the plural of majesty attached to it. There's also Kadoshim. Kadosh is holy plus the plural of majesty there. And so that can indicate that it's talking about God, the Holy One. But you never, ever, ever have any person who is any human being who's given the majestic plural. We never have Moshe im, like Moses plus im, or Yahoshua im, Joshua plus im. There's no person in the entire Old Testament who's given the im ending as a plural of majesty, that just never happens. And so that's showing us that this clearly Machmadim, Machmad, is not a proper name, because im never is attached to people, it's only attached to God when it's used as a plural of majesty. Now, the other issue is that in general, im is never used on names of any person, including God. That it doesn't make sense. Even in English, we would never add the s as an ending, as a plural ending for a name in English. And the same is true with Hebrew, that you never have a personal name taking the plural im. And this is true for God as well. God, his title is Elohim, that's his title is God, or Adonai, but his name is Yahweh. That's his actual personal name that he reveals to Moses in Exodus chapter 3. But even for God, you never have Yahweh im. Yahweh im never happens because it's just grammatically impossible. And so we now can see there are two reasons that Machmadim cannot be a plural of majesty. One, because plural of majesty only applies to God and never humans. And two, because plurals in general never apply to personal names, to proper names. They only apply to titles or common nouns. So, if Machmadim is not a plural of majesty in Song of Solomon chapter 5 verse 16, then what's going on here? Well, Hebrew plurals can have other functions than just plural of majesty. There are, for example, plurals of extension, where we have the word shamayim. Shamayim comes from the root shama, which is heavens. It's related to the Arabic word sama. And then you add the im ending to show that it's extended over a great space, over the whole world, right? The skies cover the whole world. And even in English, we say this. We say skies as a plural of extension. There are also plurals of abstraction in Hebrew, where if you are taking an abstract concept, like an adjective or description, and you want to make it into a noun, you will add the im ending. And this is exactly what's happening here in Song of Solomon, chapter 5, verse 16. When we read this passage, we have to understand that this is poetry, and that the beginning of this verse is a poetic doublet. I'm going to read it again in Hebrew, and you'll hear the two halves of the doublet. The first part is Hiko mamtakim. Second part is Vecholo machmadim. So Hiko mamtakim, Vecholo machmadim. You can hear there is a similar rhythm, a similar syllable structure, and they rhyme. And so in Hebrew poetry, there's mirroring that always goes on between the first and second half of the doublet. And so in the first half of the doublet, we have Hiko mamtakim. His mouth is sweet. Well, what's interesting is that mamtakim is definitely a plural of abstraction. And it's even Ahmed Deedat does not address this issue, that mamtakim is not a name. There's no reason to think it's a name. It means sweet or sweetness. And so mamtak is sweet, and so mamtakim is sweetness. So literally this phrase is, his mouth is sweetness. Then the second half of the doublet, Vecholo machmadim, and all of him is lovely. And so it would make sense for mamtakim to be a plural of abstraction and also machmadim to be two plurals of abstraction, where they are describing an abstract concept but making it into a noun. So if a Muslim wants to say that Machmadim is actually a proper noun, is actually the name Mohammed, they're going to have to give a solid linguistic reason for why Mamtakim is a plural of abstraction and it's not a proper name, whereas Machmadim is a proper name. And I personally don't see any distinction between those two parts of the sentence, that Mamtakim and Machmadim are functioning in the same role in their halves of the doublet. And so semantically, it would not make any sense for one of them to be an adjective and one of them to be a name. So clearly, this is a plural of abstraction rather than a plural of majesty. And as we've seen, this is definitely not a name and is therefore definitely not Muhammad. So, as we can see, the word Machmadim in Song of Solomon is in no way referring to a proper noun or a person whose name is Mahmad or Muhammad. There's just absolutely no linguistic basis to argue that whatsoever. But what's interesting is that even if we granted that premise, even if we said to Ahmed Deedat or a Muslim, that's fine. You know what? Machmad is a name in Song of Solomon. That still would prove nothing. Why is that? Well, just having the name of someone who's going to be born in the future in a book is not enough. That's not a prophecy. A prophecy needs to have information about this person or some sort of claim about what they're going to do. You can't just have a random name thrown into the middle of a book with no context and no understanding of who that person is, and then later on claim that that name is referring to a certain person. That's totally illegitimate. For example, would Muslims consider it legitimate if a Mormon said, hey, my prophet is Joseph Smith, and in the Quran, there's somebody named Joseph. The name Joseph is in the Quran. Therefore, the Quran is prophesying about Joseph Smith as the prophet of the Mormons. No, of course, that argument is crazy and totally illegitimate, because when you read the Quran and it talks about Joseph, that Joseph is talking about a person who was in the past. It's talking about what he did in his context, and there's no indication that the Joseph in the Quran is a prophecy of a coming prophet. So the fact that the name Joseph is in the Quran in no way shows that it's prophesying about Joseph Smith, who is to come later. And the same thing is true with the Bible. Just because the name Muhammad is found randomly in the Bible in no way shows that that's a prophecy of Muhammad. And in the case of the Quran, at least Joseph is an actual name in the Quran. In the Bible, Machmadim is not even a name, it's just an adjective. So this is a terrible argument that should never be used. Muslims, please do not use this argument. This has no linguistic basis whatsoever, and it's just something that distorts and confuses the topic, and it gets us off track of the real issues that Christians and Muslims have to argue with each other. So, I hope this video has been helpful. Please let me know in the comments if you like these shorter form videos as opposed to the longer form videos I have been doing. And I pray that the Lord blesses you and your family.